Are you really alone when you're with Robert? When you think you're alone in the house, footsteps would cower around, screeches, giggles, and scorns. Soon enough, there was Robert the doll staring back at you with his big, black, beady eyes, and when you left a minute and returned, he was nowhere to be found. A man walked up to Robert the doll amongst other fans and spectators who had come to witness the airy and creepy aura of the stuffed toy. Robert the doll was up on display at the Fort East Martello Museum for many and everyone to take pictures of and with. But many dared not anger the soul that haunted the doll by stealing from him or commenting poorly about him. Fully aware of the rumors surrounding Robert the doll and how he had punished those who faulted him, the man, skeptical at most, cared not for them. He gave Robert the doll a quick scan up to the bottom, and then looked the doll straight in the eyes. The words, "I don't even see what's so intriguing about this thing. Why do so many waste their money just to look at a toy locked in a transparent box? A poorly designed one as well. It's basically ugly." The man chuckled at the doll, whose expression seems to have changed from its iconic smile to a merciless grin, though he didn't pay much attention to it. "You should not say such things in front of Robert," another spectator cautioned him from the side, but he just looked at his advisor as though he was a lunatic, took photos of the doll he planned to use for work, and walked away, out of the museum, into his car, and headed home. At his home waiting was a wife and kid who had expected him home by noon. Midnight came with no word from or about him. Only the next morning was the wife visited by the cops, who informed her of the passing of her husband due to an accident that occurred on the street while heading home. Eugene hated but loved his doll a lot. Much he couldn't stand it yet, couldn't be without it. His bond with the doll was so immense throughout his childhood that he found himself taking Robert wherever, whenever he left home. And while at home and working on his artistry, he would have Robert seated next to him, as if as to judge his work. This relationship, however strong, only grew toxic. Robert Eugene Otto was a kid with great talent, his imagination unbound, and his lineage neither. He came from a prominent Key West household who would have a lot to say about their child, especially after the introduction of a doll. A straw-stuffed, life-size doll with black beads for eyes and an unchanging smirk. Eugene's grandfather had just returned from his long trip to Germany, and while the family was bustling with excitement to have him back, Eugene would get a wonderful surprise as he was gifted with the doll for his birthday. Almost instantly, Eugene fell deeply into a trance with his doll. He even named the doll after him, Robert. The family had seen how drawn to the doll Eugene was, but thought nothing of it. No one would have expected the relationship between a man and a stuffed figure to grow so out of bounds. It affected the way he related to the world. Some have even speculated that Eugene's grandfather had purposefully gifted his grandson with a haunted doll to punish him for his previous wrongdoings. As time went on, Eugene would stop relating with Robert as a toy to be played with, but rather as a person with a soul to be respected. He even started calling himself Gene, and many had wondered whether the doll was hell-bent on stealing Eugene's identity and making the boy his toy. Switching up the roles between them, whatever the case may be, this strong and strange relationship would soon become toxic. Eugene was walking home from school after taking Robert with him. His doll friend had been discovered by his classmates, and he had been laughed at and called a baby for clinging onto a doll. On their trek home, Eugene was pissed and blamed Robert for what had happened. He had initially dropped the doll in his locker where he would not be seen, but during classes, Robert the doll, almost out of thin air, appeared right next to his seat, which made the whole class laugh at him. As he walked home, constantly cursing at Robert, he tripped on a stick. He could have sworn wasn't there when he looked. and now landed on his face and was injured. He noticed that somehow Robert, who was in his hands, had landed safely by his side and stared at him with a bright smirk. Eugene knew Robert was to blame for what had happened both at school and now. From there on, Eugene and Robert developed a very toxic but strongly bonded relationship. It felt as though Eugene lived to please Robert, and anytime Eugene displeased the doll, Robert would punish Eugene for it. The series of effects carried on multiple occasions, and eventually, Eugene would complain to his parents about the maltreatment Robert the doll was inflicting on him. But his parents only took his words by face value and didn't see much sense in it. Though it's known that Eugene's parents had reported noticing some unusual occurrences that seemed to link to Robert the doll, almost as though attached to Robert or imprisoned by him. Eugene grew up with the doll by his side, and when he moved into a stately home he called the artist house, Robert was right there with him, positioned at an upstairs window for all to see. Children who came playing by Eugene's home would have run home to their parents in utter shock, proclaiming to have seen Robert the doll move or disappear from spot to spot. 1974 came by after Otto had passed on, leaving both his home and Robert behind. The home was purchased by Myrtle Reuter, who automatically became the new owner of Robert, and she had a lot to tell. In her time spent with the doll, she and those who visited reported hearing footsteps from the attic, and when no one was supposed to be there, giggles and sounds from thin air buzzed the house. And personally, Myrtle on many occurrences would find Robert in several different spots, even when no one had touched him. Robert's new owner eventually became fed up with the doll's antics and decided it was time to part ways with the doll. In 1994, Robert was donated to the Fort East Martello Museum, where his story completely changed. He became a national buzz, gaining thousands of fans, from which many traveled to this museum just to see him. He experienced fame, receiving thousands of emails from people who had wronged him on their visits, to begging for his forgiveness, asking for advice, and making other comments about him. He even got money, sweets, and joints placed next to his display box. To this day, Robert sits in his box getting an annual checkup by Convertido. She hasn't reported any unusual activities and says Robert's been a good boy, but who knows? Maybe the soul who once haunted Robert has long moved on to find its next host. It's to be noted that the sailor attire Robert the doll wears once belonged to Eugene from his childhood.